Everyone, and welcome. The Broadband Bunch Zero Touch Learning Series is live. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Craig Corbin. Today's session, Getting the Broadband That Your Community Wants, Factors in Deciding to Build It Yourselves. This is the sixth in our series. All previous sessions have been recorded for posterity and are available on our website at www.etisoftware.com. You'll also find a listing of all future topics there as well. Broadband Bunch podcasts and Zero Touch Learning Series events, all brought to you as always by ETI Software, a proud member of the Fiber Broadband Association. And be sure to follow the Broadband Bunch on Facebook at www.facebook.com/the Broadband Bunch. A couple of quick reminders before we introduce our esteemed panel. All Broadband Bunch Learning Series events are most definitely designed to be interactive. We encourage you to submit questions via the chat function. Our team will be monitoring all submissions throughout today's event. And of course, as we mentioned, it is being recorded and will be available to all attendees for future access. Also, please feel free to submit potential topics for future Zero Touch Learning Series sessions, or if you'd like to suggest prospective panelists, again, you can do that via the chat function. And most importantly, thanks in advance for your participation. Today's topic, no doubt timely, especially given the increased demand for connectivity as a result of the unprecedented challenges we are all facing. And our panelists are standing by. Their introduction is straight ahead. But first, my privilege to introduce our moderator, Heather Gold, currently CEO of HBG Strategy and a 30-year veteran of the communications industry. She previously served as president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association, following her tenure as senior vice president of external affairs and access management for XO Communications. Heather graduated magna cum laude from Tufts University with bachelor's and master's degrees in economics, and later earned an MBA in finance and marketing from Washington University in St. Louis. Our moderator for Getting the Broadband That Your Community Wants, Factors in Deciding to Build It Yourselves, Heather Gold. Heather, welcome.
Thanks, Craig, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. Is your community getting the broadband it wants and needs? Or are you constantly frustrated by the incumbents saying either the investment case doesn't make it or your citizens have enough for what they're currently using? If this is you, maybe it's time for a change. Time to recognize that broadband, just like sewers, water, and the traffic lights of yesterday, is the essential community service of tomorrow. In light of all the new demands being put on our broadband networks, particularly by the pandemic, for health, education, and government services, it is more imperative than ever that you give your citizens the broadband they need and want. Today's speakers offer a wide range of experience and answers to the questions on how to implement community broadband. Our first speaker, Chris Mitchell, is probably known to everyone on the call. He's the Director of Community Broadband Networks at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. He can give us the lay of the land across the whole U.S., how many communities-owned broadband networks are in existence and how they all came to be. Next, we'll hear from Ben Feynman, who's president of the Michigan Broadband Cooperative, who can indicate how one state, Michigan, has addressed the issue at the town, county, and regional levels, and has also taken its expanded middle mile educational network, the Merit system, and used that to augment community broadband. The last two speakers bring us the advantage of on-the-ground experience. Steve Lang, the IT manager from the city of Wadsworth, can tell us how one market entry mechanism, overbuilding the cable company, has led to the evolution of Wadsworth network. And last but not least, we'll hear from Will Aycock, the general manager of Greenlight Communications in Wilson, North Carolina, who can discuss some of the many challenges and opportunities to building in the state, which has limitations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kick it off.
Thank you. The way I'd like to start is the way I often start, and that's with trying to see if I have the controls. I don't see that I do, but you can just move it to the right, to the next slide. The way I like to start is to set a common goal, which is that I don't want to talk about megabits per second. I don't think you should have to learn necessarily about megabits per second or things like that. Our goal is that we find that internet access is just available. And if you go out to a store, you buy a device, you bring it home, you're confident it will work. That's how electricity works. We don't have to know how much water pressure we have in our homes to be able to use it effectively. Similarly with natural gas appliances, we know that what we have in the home will support any range of normal usage and even frankly above normal usage in most cases. So that's one base level I want to set. The other is on the next slide, which is that a reminder that when we think about broadband to the home, we need to think of it as connecting multiple devices. Too often people get stuck in thinking about what application could require this level of service. And it's not the right question. The right question is the connection able to do all the things a family would want to do? Talking about tens of devices, using it concurrently, maybe not so much at 3 a.m., but certainly a whole heck of a lot at 7 or 8 p.m. And so the right way to think about this is what can we do that will support all of the uses in the home and provide sufficient margin that we have really good performance and we're able to keep low latency to encourage new networks, which is just a way of saying, is the network really responsive or is it barely keeping up? So with that, those are the two baselines that I'd like to set. And the next slide, I'll just say that my organization, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, has been around for more than 40 years now, working on a variety of issues. Our work on the internet has been something we focused on for 15 years in my program, and we are focused on what communities can do to solve their problems locally, focusing largely on municipal networks and also cooperative approaches. The next slide, please. For municipal networks and cooperative approaches, we've tried to document what's happening. Spent a lot of time reading about the folks you're going to hear from. We've interviewed many of them. We've had a podcast series. Really welcome the entry of more podcasts like the Broadband Bunch, which is something I listen to regularly. But we've had a podcast and we write on muninetworks.org. We release videos, reports, all kinds of things to try and keep track of this. So you might as well drop on by if you get a chance. The next slide. One of the things that we were early known for is tracking the different community municipal networks that were out there. And to date, there's well over 500 of them. These break down in a variety of ways and different methods. And if you go to that link, you can actually turn pins on and off to get a better sense of what model is available. The key thing to keep in mind is that there are many different approaches. No one approach is right. Communities have different needs. They have different assets. They have different restrictions legally. And so we try to keep that in mind as we talk about different models and we talk about the merits, the pros, the cons, but there's no one model that'll be right for everyone. There are about 125, 130 cities that have citywide municipal fiber today. That comes from about 55 or 60 networks because some networks serve multiple towns. There's some 200 or more networks that have a network that is connecting part of the city, perhaps a business district or part of the residential area, or maybe they're going for the entire city, but they just haven't gotten there yet. So we classify those as partial. There's other approaches that involve dark fiber that I think we'll ignore for now, but we don't even get into the wireless approaches, which would show even more communities that have taken local action. But there's a lot of different models out there. We try to categorize them all. Next slide, please. This is something that appears to be conflicted if you want to look around. If you do a search for municipal broadband on Google or another internet search engine, you may see reports suggesting that they are all failures, or most of them are failures, or that they are dangerous and that we will all become socialists if we allow some cities to build networks. The simple fact is most Americans support this decision being made locally. And I always get a chuckle out of the socialism claim because Will Aycock is part of a municipal electric utility. And more than 100 years ago, we were told that if cities like his were able to build electricity as a utility, that the market system would fail and we would not have any freedom left. And I would like to put forward that I think networks doing electricity like Will has done have led to more freedom, more liberty, better markets. And so I like to just deal with that head on. There are some people who are paid to make it seem like this is controversial or dangerous. What is dangerous is making an uninformed decision. And so we take seriously that there are things that can go wrong. We've looked at networks that have struggled. We like to know why, and we encourage communities to do their homework. But there is no reason to think that this is more dangerous than other important decisions that local communities are making on a daily basis. So my main point, though, is on the next slide, and you have to go pretty quickly through these. I do sports photography as my side hustle. I did before we had a pandemic and we had no more sports at the local level. And the thing that I like to point out, if you look in the lower right, that's me with a camera. If you look at the pictures that I take and sell, people will often say, you must have a really great camera. It really upsets us photographers. Next slide, please. So we'll say something snotty like, yeah, I got my camera where Shakespeare bought his pens, or the next slide where Steph Curry bought his shoes, or the next slide where Lance Armstrong bought his bike. I can't take that out of the slide deck. I've been using this for a while, even though it turns out it wasn't about the bike. It still makes the key point, and that's on the next slide, which is that it is not about the fiber. If you look at the technology that they used in Chattanooga, if you look at the technology Will Aycock uses, that any fiber network is using, it's generally pretty much off the shelf. They're using similar technology that the big companies are using when AT&T deploys fiber to some, or Verizon, and the results couldn't be more different, and that's because of the incentives. Community networks have different incentives to operate, and they result in different outcomes. So you get much more jobs, you get better low-income access, and a variety of benefits when it's locally owned. And so I encourage people not to get hung up too much on the technology. Next slide, please. So we've released a number of reports. We've talked about Wilson. If you go to the next slide, I'll let Will talk about Wilson. We are actually updating that one. I'm excited to nail down some of the details that we've seen since then. But there are incremental approaches for cities that don't have the authority or the capacity to bond in that way, to take limited steps. There are solutions on the next slide for people in Indian country. This is one of the greatest problems that we have in terms of rural broadband. Many reservations, many parts of Indian country simply don't have decent access. We're seeing a lot of solutions out there at the local level. Next slide, please. There are solutions in which cities may not want to provide service directly in the way that, for instance, Wadsworth and Greenlight do with Will. In those situations, about 30 communities have a network that they've built, and they make it open to multiple providers. This is a model that is changing significantly. I think we're going to see it maturing in coming years, and I think there's a lot of reason to be enthusiastic about it. If you're interested in this sort of thing, I encourage you to think about software-defined networks in particular. It's something the Broadband Bunch has talked about. The next slide, please. There are solutions just focusing on public housing and low-income communities. I think those are important to keep in mind. When you're trying to figure out what problem your community is trying to solve, don't think of it as better broadband. You should be thinking of it as a specific issue, which is to say, for instance, competition, access for those who can't afford what's already there, or economic development. Those are things to think about rather than just better broadband. Next slide, please. We're also seeing a model that I think would be appropriate for large cities. Most of the cities that have built municipal broadband networks are smaller cities, often less than 50,000 people. And New York has come up with a plan in which the city would be building a neutral infrastructure to almost every street corner if it's fully funded. And then local entrepreneurs or neighborhoods would then be able to use that. So they could just focus on building their network in their city block or in their neighborhood, and then the city of New York would make it cost effective for them to get to the wider internet, which is a very intriguing model for larger cities, I think. Next slide, please. We're also seeing a model of conduit that is developing more rapidly. West Des Moines moving forward with Google, Fiber, and other providers in a non-exclusive basis, where the city's building a conduit system and then leasing that out at a very affordable rate. This can be done not only to the home, but also for major congested areas where right-of-way is being exhausted. So there's so many different models. I want to hit one last one, and that is on the next slide, which is where cities may work together to create a cooperative. There's different ways of doing this. In the case of this case study, cities use their bonding authority to be able to build a network that was cooperatively owned by people. The cities basically put in the seed capital for this rural network. And so it's not technically a municipal network, but it's cities using authority to establish a cooperative network that would not otherwise have been able to be established. So there's a lot of models, but I'll end it there because the three folks who are following can give you many more details on three specific models that I'm excited about. I think have really have a lot to offer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. And just before Ben starts, I did want to thank you for talking about the shared network model. That will be our next, that is our next planned broadband bunch virtual learning, which will be later in, which will be early September. So stay tuned for information on that. Ben?
Great. Heather, appreciate you inviting me, having me here. And it's a great bunch of panelists, so I appreciate the opportunity to be one of them. So my name is Ben Feynman. The hat I am wearing today is the president of the Michigan Broadband Cooperative, but I do various things with broadband in Michigan, a few of which I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so. On the next slide, the place I want to start is a case study of the township that I live in, which is Linden Township. And this was the reason that I got into the broadband game in the first place. I've worked for a long time, about 16 years, for a company called Internet 2, which is the nonprofit company that runs the research and education network for the U.S. But when I moved out to the rural community of Linden Township, I was kind of appalled to see that nobody out here had anything approaching broadband, let alone the gigabit plus connection speeds I was used to seeing at Internet 2. So the jumping to the end of the story, we were able to go from 95% unserved to fiber to the home available for everybody, 1 gigabit symmetric connections and no data caps. So how we did that on the next slide was a process that ended up spanning a few years, but we did get there, starting with surveying and data collection. So we started back in 2013, and back at that time, it was kind of a less commonly known fact how bad the FCC coverage data was. And so we had to do a lot of our own legwork to really show that the coverage in Linden Township was non-existent, even if other data sources suggested otherwise. And beyond that, we had to show that people actually wanted better coverage, because again, it seems obvious to everybody on this call, but especially 7 years ago, you can't just take it as read that people actually want broadband. So we had to do the surveying and be able to prove that people did want broadband using that data. And then we had some town halls to talk about what to do next, which resulted in conducting a feasibility study. The feasibility study showed us, well, it laid out the options, wireless versus fiber versus hybrid and things like that. And for using that data, we had a number of other town halls and selected the route that we wanted to pursue, which was building a full fiber solution, so connecting all the households in the township to fiber with a price tag of $7 million. Now, Linden Township's a rural community with about 1,200 households. It certainly didn't have $7 million in the general fund, nor did they have the ability to just borrow that $7 million. So the way that we chose to finance it was by voting to levy a property tax on ourselves to pay for that $7 million price tag. I'm pleased to say that the vote passed by a margin of 2-1. It was the highest voter turnout on record for that particular election. And yeah, on the next slide, what we ended up with was a municipally owned fiber network, and formed a public-private partnership with a private operator called Midwest Energy and Communications. MEC is a nonprofit electric cooperative that's also been building out fiber to the home over their electric footprint. And before they took on Linden Township, they had about 10,000 of their own fiber to the home customers. So for them to add on about 1,000 more customers in our township was not a big hardship. But so the public investment was that $7 million bond financed by a millage, 2.9 mils over 20 years. So for the average property owner in Linden Township, that ends up being $23 a month. And then the service fees that that residents pay to MEC, and that the township keeps the service fees and pays MEC out of that for their operator fees. I won't go through the whole table, but at the top end, you're getting gigabit for $70 a month. Even when you add on the millage, the gigabit for $93 a month is pretty competitive, no matter where you look. If we go to the next slide, one of the things we found out in Linden Township is that that particular model of voting for residents to tax themselves is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. And so another township to the south of us tried to do the same thing, and their millage was defeated at the ballot by a margin of 2-1. And so we went to the, as a next step, went to the county level to figure out how to address the situation for the other townships in Washtenaw County. So Linden Township is up in that top left corner. And the main issue that we were addressing there is not dissimilar to Linden, that the FCC data for Washtenaw County is really bad. And so kind of as a step zero, we need to show the magnitude of the problem that actually exists. And so this is a map of the FCC Form 477 data. Green indicates broadband access, red indicates no broadband access. I don't remember what the percentage of, but it's something like 96% served according to the FCC. So we partnered with Merit Network. Merit is a 501c3 nonprofit that operates the research and education network for the state of Michigan. I'll talk a little bit more about what they're doing in the broadband space. But they came to the table to partner with Washtenaw County and conduct a countywide, not just a survey, but also a speed test. So having individuals conduct speed tests that were correlated with their addresses so we could get specific coverage data for the county. And if we go to the next slide, hopefully my transition works, and we will see what the actual coverage data looks like. So it's quite a different picture. And there's 3 different colors here. We not only have the green, which indicates that people have broadband, and that agrees with the FCC data. The pink indicates that people don't have broadband, and that agrees with the FCC data. But the red are the census blocks where people don't have broadband, but the FCC data says that they do. And so it's obvious that there's a big disparity that we were able to uncover by doing this surveying exercise. And yeah, you can see from that little graph on the bottom right, the FCC, yeah, it was actually 98% coverage that the FCC indicated, whereas our data shows that only 37% of people actually have broadband in the rural areas. That's another important point. We have the city of Ann Arbor and the city of Ypsilanti. We didn't survey those areas because we understand there is ubiquitous coverage there. This doesn't address the economic access issue, which is something that I don't want to minimize. That is on the scope for a future phase of the project. If we go to the next slide. So how did Washtenaw County do what we have done? So we formed a broadband task force at the county level. And this was actually a multi-year process. The first phase of the task force was basically laying the groundwork to show that there actually was a problem. And then the second phase asked for the county to spend money to conduct these studies and do the work to start addressing the problem. So we've done the data collection. We're in the process of doing feasibility and pre-engineering for the unserved areas so that we can be in a position to go after grant funding and seek private partners to help address the issue, which goes to the, I think might be my last slide, if we want to go to the next slide. the biggest problem, and this is a very simplistic view of a complex issue, is who's going to pay for it. Because if there were somebody willing to pay for the broadband infrastructure, then we wouldn't have the problem. So I've loosely categorized this into 3 buckets. The first one being grants, and there are state grants and federal grants. Everybody wants to go after grant money because it seems like it's free money, it's the easy road. As many people on this call probably know, it doesn't usually play out that way. In terms of grants are very competitive. Grants have a matching component. Grants have certain obligations that come with them. But if you can get a grant, that can be an important piece of the puzzle. The second bucket is public investment. So Linden Township did a millage. Other communities are in a position to do a revenue-based model where they borrow money with the anticipation of future revenue, being able to pay that back. Another model we're interested in Michigan is called special assessment districts. That has different names in different states, but it's essentially being able to carve out a part of a municipality and making that into a district and only levying a tax for that district, the properties in that district, for fiber optic or similar infrastructure. In Michigan, that's not currently allowed, and so we've been working with the legislature to make that allowed. But like anything else in politics, that's been a long road. And then the last one is private investment. So again, if for-profit companies wanted to do this or saw a business case to do it, they would have already done it. So to get private companies to build broadband infrastructure, you have to figure out a way to incentivize them to do that. So that's another approach. And then the last one is cooperatives and nonprofit organizations, which are a different incentivization model. And I will finish, and this is actually the last slide, which brings me to what we've been doing with Merit Network. So Merit's focus is research and education, and they have a statewide fiber network that's very robust, but it's historically been limited to schools and community anchor institutions. In the last year or two, they have recognized that residential broadband is a critical piece of the education picture, particularly for K-12 school kids, but in the current environment for everybody, where university learning is taking place from home and adult education and everything else. So based on that, Merit is trying to help with the residential broadband component. One of the early things we've done with that is created a broadband framework document. And the important takeaway here is that this is not just information provided by Merit and myself, but this aggregates information from lots of other frameworks and sources from other national organizations that are working to help address the broadband gap. So this framework document is, it's like 700 pages if you count the appendices, and it's available for free at that web link there. And that's where I will wrap it up. On the last slide is my email address, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions or if you want to connect. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Now to hear from our operators, who of course have the advantage of actually knowing what it's like on the ground to start and run one of these networks. Steve.
Yes, thank you for having me. Appreciate being here with all the other panelists. My name is Steve Lang. I'm the IT manager for the city of Wadsworth in Ohio. And the city of Wadsworth runs a municipal internet service provider called Citylink. And Citylink's been around since 1997 when they started with analog cable TV. They added cable modem internet service. Broadband at the time was basically like a dial-up modem replacement back then, back in 2001. We updated our TV to digital cable with HD in 2007. We upgraded to DOCSIS 3 with the latest broadband speeds in 2012. We added VoIP service in 2012 as well. Home energy management was added in 2013 as part of a next generation utility project. Last year we added managed Wi-Fi, and which goes along with what was said earlier with all the different devices that are on all the time. And we're currently looking at fiber to the home as a potential future offering. So that's kind of the landscape we're at right now. We offer cable modem speeds up to 500 megabits right now. And a pretty decent service. Next slide, please. So why did we start it? What I've been told, I've been there for 14 years, so I wasn't there at the beginning, but basically what I was told, and it still is true today, is we wanted our residents to have options. We wanted them to not just have one provider in town that was the monopoly. That was the case in Wadsworth, and then they wanted basically everyone to be able to save money on their cable and internet bill, whether they went with us or not. So you're going to have people that stay with the other provider, and hopefully because of the competition, those people will pay less as well, and the services will be better because there is that competition. So that was the main reason. We weren't money driven, we're not profit driven, we are service driven, and we want to provide a great service at a good price. So the factors that made it possible, obviously the capital expenses that you heard from Ben, that was made back in the day by the city, hiring qualified personnel, everything from a construction crew to installers, customer service reps, fiber techs, the system administrators that work on the servers and the storage, all that, and the list goes on. There's so many. The other thing that made it possible, since we were a small town, just getting involved, we were kind of a small situation, night and weekend support available by a third party. So there was a nice situation where we didn't have to have someone at all hours of the day. We took advantage of that for many, many years, over a decade. And then even just in the last 2 years, we've converted to having all support local. But probably the single number one biggest thing that enabled us to start this is the fact that the city was a municipal power city. So we owned the utility poles in town, and that is such a huge advantage. You don't have to deal with the pole attach agreements. You don't have to work through all the legal stuff. Like, we can actually, I mean, you have to follow the rules obviously, but we have the ability to put up anything we need to on the utility poles to make that happen. And we already had the crew from the electric side that was versed in how to do that. Next slide, please. So we had some growing pains at the beginning. We were the new player on the block, and the other provider had been established for more than a decade. Everybody in town pretty much had them. They had more TV channels than we did when we started out. They had faster internet speeds than we did when we started out. They also offered phone service, which we did not have at the time. But over the years, we kept improving our infrastructure. We kept increasing our subscriber base, and if you put out a decent service, a really good service, and you have great support around it, and you respond quickly to people's requests, it's funny how word of mouth can really travel, and before you know it, you kind of start some synergy that really goes throughout the community. And we currently have 5,400 subscribers, and we're gaining every year. When I started 14 years ago, we had about 2,000, and we're gaining more every year now than we were back then. So things are definitely looking in the right direction as far as people that we can serve. Next slide, please. So why do people in the town appreciate the Citylink services? Well, it's fast and reliable internet speeds, competitive pricing. We force the other provider in town to have lower pricing. If you literally go out of our service area by a few feet, the price you will pay with that provider literally goes up 50%. There's no introductory rates. So we don't get into any residential contracts. We don't do any hidden fees when you get your bill. You can literally go on our website. You can pick the services you want. It will tell you down to the penny what you're going to pay and what you will actually see on that bill. Totally transparent. We have fast response times for support issues. If you call in, you're talking to a live person, usually within 2 rings. If you send a support email, you usually get a reply in less than an hour, sometimes less than 15 minutes. So it all depends on what the situation is, but we have very fast response times. It's operated by people that a lot of people in the community know and recognize. So they like the fact that they know the people that are running their ISP. A lot of people like to keep their money local in town instead of supporting a big corporation. There are some people that just like to keep local businesses booming. And one of the really cool things I thought when I first started too was that you can get all your utilities on one bill here. So you can get your electric, your water, cable TV, internet, phone, trash, sewer, all of that, all on one bill. Next slide. So what did we learn over the years? It's hard to regain customers. So when you launch a product, it really needs to be battle tested, and that doesn't mean everything's got to be perfect. You're always going to have some issues here and there, but if you set the bad image initially up front, it's really hard to turn people after the fact, because basically whatever experience they have is how they're going to remember you, and that can take years to change that. Wi-Fi is pretty convenient. We all love Wi-Fi, being able to be wherever you want to go, but it doesn't always get the same speeds as hardwired, especially when you get in those faster tier speeds. And there's way more variables. So there's a lot of things that the customers don't always think of with that. A lot of people have the impression that wireless should be just as good as hardwired, so And existing customers will sometimes get a little upset if you run a new promotion to get new customers only. So we learned that too. And we try to do things for existing customers as well. We appreciate them. Next slide, please. We also learned that cable TV programming costs are really extremely expensive. There is, if you're not aware already, there is this buying co-op called the NCTC, and they are fantastic. They basically do the purchasing and negotiations for you. All the smaller cable and internet companies can be part of that if you're a muni, and it just enables you to get the best deal, and they deal with a lot of the hassle as well. So we really appreciate them. Redundancy and diversity are key factors in minimizing outages. Everything you do, if you're going to build one of these ISPs, you need to think of how can you keep it up if you lose a piece. If you can have it be done automatically, that's even better. The difference between redundancy and diversity, if you're not aware, so like redundancy would be having two routers in the same room. That's great. If you have a router fail, the other router keeps working. Diversity takes that a step further, and that's where you've got them in different buildings. So now if you have a fire in the building, it doesn't take out both routers. So having good and properly configured monitoring software is a key. We didn't always have that at the beginning, so now we've got that. There was a period of time where we experienced alarm fatigue, where you didn't have your alarms tweaked exactly right, and then if you start getting too many alarms, people stop paying attention to them. So it's good to take your time with your monitoring software, get it really tuned. We also learned that managing an email server and fighting spam is very time consuming. It basically came down to, do we want to hire a dedicated person to do that, or do we want to outsource it? So a decade ago, we outsourced it, and we're very happy with that decision. Next slide, please. That's basically it. Welcome any questions you have during the Q&A, and thank you for your time.
Steve, I have a quick one before we move on to Will. What is your churn? Do you have a minimum contract period, or?
So you have to have the service for 30 days.
Okay.
Yep. But we also give you the first month free, and if you're not happy during that first month, we're not going to make you pay for another month. So basically,
Okay. It's a trial period.
A trial period. Yeah, we don't ever want to force people into keeping us. If you're not happy for whatever reason, we want you to be happy somewhere else. But we find that because we take care of our customers, we have good service, they tend to stay.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Well, I know you've got the scars to show us all the wounds of getting through all this.
There are a few scars, but before I get started, I do want to say thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel. I'm honored to be here with everybody else. And Steve, absolutely, I will just say ditto to pretty much everything you said. Lessons learned are the same here as they are there. So I will try not to be redundant in what you just said, but it resonated greatly with me and our experience here. So again, my name is Will Aycock. I'm the Greenlight General Manager in Wilson, North Carolina. We've been operating since about 2007, and our model was certificates of participation, so essentially a revenue bond that allowed us to go out and build the network, and then we borrowed internally from other operating funds to get it off the ground. But really, to understand Wilson's story, or the Greenlight story, you need to know a little bit about Wilson. And what's really important to understand is that we are a gateway community. We are on the interface between Eastern North Carolina and the Research Triangle region, so Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, where the major universities are, which most people have heard of. And so our community at times has a bit of an identity crisis in that we are very much associated with the Research Triangle Park, and because of some of the corporations here, the tobacco industry and BB&T, now Truist, being founded in the community, we've had a very vibrant economy, and we've had a lot of metropolitan people who expect the services being provided by the municipality to be on par with anything available anywhere else in the world. But we also have a lot of more rural areas that we serve. We are a regional provider of electric, gas, water, and broadband. And so when council directed us to build this network, the idea was not that we wanted to be first, but rather not last. We didn't want to be left behind as a community as other parts of the state were getting that ubiquitous broadband access. So that led us to the point we're at today. Next slide. And that decision builds on a history. So historically, Wilson has been known as the world's greatest tobacco market, and that's really in part because of this gateway nature of our community. So from the rural eastern parts of the state where there's lots of agricultural production, we were a market center. So farmers would bring their crop to market in Wilson, and then thereby access to more urban areas where you get to places like Durham by the American Tobacco Campus, where they were processing and creating product and then on into the other parts of the state. Winston-Salem and up into Virginia. So we were a natural nexus between the regions of the state here. But that didn't just happen because of geography. It also happened because of the public investments. So before broadband, we first built an electric distribution system in the late 1800s. We got into natural gas in the early 1900s. In the 1990s, we built one of the largest reservoirs in the state, because this idea is that we want to make sure our community is self-sufficient and has all of the available resources that are required to continue to grow and prosper. Next slide. So we sit here today, almost 15 years closing in on it since we first launched the service. We've got a little over 11,000 subscribers. We first built the corporate limits of the community and then slowly have been expanding out from there. And we are serving, literally all walks of life within the community. Our major employers, large agribusiness, residential, small office, all of the school system. We're pretty much ingrained in and embedded in the community. And I will really echo what Chris said. I think the difference maker here about community broadband is just that. Whatever flavor it is from Ben's presentation, the different models, it's the community focus and orientation that I really think makes the difference and is what can help make these networks successful, whatever business model you take. Next slide. So our purpose, why we exist, is to help support the economic health of our community and enhance the quality of life of our citizens and improve the delivery of city services. This is stuff that we focus on all day, every day. And the improving delivery of city services is pretty straightforward because we're deploying smart grid technologies, and we are doing a lot more smart city monitoring, flood sensors, things of that nature all across the community, and our network provides the backbone for all those technologies. And enhancing the quality of life for our citizens, in part we're doing that because we built the network, we made it accessible, so no one is without in terms of access to the network. And a lot of the things we're finding in terms of the economy is we're seeing a lot of in-migration, people moving from other places to Wilson because they know about the broadband network and they find it to be desirable. But we also realize that these successes are not enough. Next slide. So we've begun edging out. As a regional provider, we provide wholesale power to several small towns in the region who have their own electric distribution systems. So back in 2015, our council authorized us to go and build out to the town of Pine Tops, one of our wholesale power customers, and we overbuilt the entire town. And we were able to do that thanks to preemption of North Carolina state law that prohibited us from expanding beyond Wilson County by the FCC at the time. That preemption was challenged, and we were together with Chattanooga, who had also petitioned for the preemption, and we lost. So that's at least part of the scars that Heather was talking about. And we were given a temporary exemption that said that we could operate until someone else came into the market and offered or indicated they intended to offer a similar service. So in 2017, Citylink came in and began building, and we had to withdraw from the market. So it has not been all success all the time, although fortunately we were able to sell that plant to another independent operator, and he is a community-based provider, and he is now succeeding down there, competing against the larger company that came in to force us out of the market. Next slide. So this is just more of the coverage there about how we were forced out and actually had to disconnect customers. And it takes us into a place where customers were unable to work from home. People would be applying for jobs, would come and realize what their broadband availability was, and the company would say, no, your infrastructure is not sufficient to allow you to work from your home. to then having jobs that they secured because the network was available and then pulling the rug out from underneath them. Those are real stories of things that have happened, and you can go online and read more about those types of situations that occurred here in our community. Next slide. But we continue to move forward where we are able to inside of Wilson County, building out to rural areas. I will say one thing we've learned is that telecommunications industry is powerful. Agribusiness is also quite powerful. And so, one of the hallmarks of our expansion has been building out to large producers, to large farming operations in the county and providing services to them. And then thusly, everyone in between picks up service as well as we're building out to these major economic producers. But we've realized too that we need to do more to help bridge the digital divide, to get people onto the network. Access is one thing, affordability is another. So our first effort along those lines was a partnership with the Wilson Housing Authority, where we actually have a $10 per month service available to any resident of public housing in the community. That we actually are, the customer of record is the housing authority themselves, and then the individual units pay the housing authority the $10 a month rate. And we have also, since inception, been providing free internet service into any nonprofit learning lab all across the community, and that's becoming very, very important today as we're dealing with COVID, the pandemic, and they're forced to remote learning for at least the next 9 weeks in our schools continuing, to make sure that we're building more and more of these out. We've also been deploying neighborhood wireless access points. I think we're up to more than 100 deployed out in certain low-income neighborhoods to try to make sure kids have access. Next slide. So again, we've got 265 customers now connected through the Wilson Housing Authority, and we are actually volunteering with our employees going in and doing, or we were before the current restrictions, going in and doing computer literacy training for residents, helping them to learn how to get online and helping them to support their students. Next slide. So outside of public housing, the other thing we've realized is that a lot of times accessibility is not just about the cost of the service, but it's about the credit worthiness of the customer. So we implemented a prepay service so people can essentially have a minimum balance of $20 on a prepay account, sign up, get access to our broadband, and then pay as you go. The service shuts itself off when the service depletes completely the balance. They can recharge through a variety of mechanisms, and it turns itself right back on in the home. And this has been particularly impactful. We have seen in the more disadvantaged areas of our community, adoption rates going from sub 10% to 25 to 30, even 35% penetration in those low-income areas. And so still, they may be underperforming compared to other areas, but that type of growth in adoption rate in low-income areas has been breathtaking. It's really starting to make a big difference. We have also expanded the $10 per month service to be available to anyone in the community now, and that was specifically a response to COVID-19. So we're trying our very best to make it as affordable and accessible to anyone in the community that needs it during this difficult time. That will be a permanent feature of our service from now on. We will not rescind that at any point in time. So hopefully by these measures, we will continue to get more and more adoption within our existing community. Next slide. The big focus going forward for us is going to be around digital transition of the community. We have partnered with Riot, which used to stand for Raleigh Internet of Things. Now it's just Riot, kind of like KFC. But they are a research and think tank organization who focuses around Internet of Things technology. They have been running accelerators in our community now for about a year in partnership with us. We are building an innovation hub that they will be located in. After our first cohort, we have seen 3 companies that came through the accelerator that are ready to move in and take space in the innovation hub. And these are all technology related businesses coming into our community to create different types of jobs. We're also working in partnership with the school system to create internships and pathways from our early college and our Academy of Applied Technology to help get students from our schools all the way through into these accelerators, into college, or into jobs here in the community to try to sustain what we have going on. Next slide. So that, in a nutshell, is what we've got going on in Wilson. I look forward to any questions you guys may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. And we have had a couple of questions come in from the audience, so I'd like to do those. Here's the first one, and it's for all of you. Residents want competition and choice to bring prices down. And this is from somebody that has done a 92 building demo program, was set in place in that regard, but the monopoly carrier is not happy. What examples do you have of munis who have built networks for the purposes of competition and choice to bring pricing down? Steve, I'm going to throw that to you because I know that's why you did what you did, right?
Absolutely. That's the entire reason we even started it. Our service director back in that time basically wanted to do something for the residents, and that was the only solution that we could think of at the time. And I'm really glad that they did that because it's turned into quite a service over the years.
And Will, have you seen pricing come down from your competitors in town, or have they just left town?
No, they were still operating here, so there is absolutely, more competition in the market. We did see those special deals where you go just outside of our service territory. To our knowledge, that has lessened now, and we both operate and compete, but those special deals are really not in place in our community anymore. Like I said, we're going on 15 years, and the certain people said that we would eliminate competition, and 15 years in, we've still got as many operators in the market, actually more, right? Because we're still here and everyone's still operating and working together. So it's definitely been our experience that it creates choice and drives down prices.
Yeah, if I could
Chris,
just,
go ahead, Chris. I was going to ask you.
I think a common impression that people have of community broadband, particularly municipal broadband, is that it's a situation like Ben is in where there's nothing. But the reality is that most of the municipal networks are in a situation like Steve or Will, where they are competing against often a cable company and some limited telephone service, maybe some fiber, but a lot of DSL. And so most municipal projects, in fact, have to deal with this because most US cities of any size have some kind of cable already. So, we do see this dynamic. We only know of 2 places in which the result of a municipal network, cable or fiber, led to the less competition afterward with the previous incumbent withdrawing. I think it's a common situation.
Ben, have you seen that or not so much because your communities haven't had other operators?
Yeah, for Linden Township, not so much because we didn't have any other operators in the first place. But yeah, I agree with Chris's characterization that rural deployments are kind of a different beast versus the city muni networks. And so on the Washtenaw County level, we're more interested in potentially addressing the competition angle as well. I wanted to go back to what Chris mentioned about open access networks as well. It's, in my view, open access is kind of the ideal model, but it's difficult to get there for a number of reasons. But if you can have a publicly owned fiber infrastructure that is open to any number of private operators, that's the ideal case for competition.
Though it will still keep the incumbents mad. Sorry.
Yes.
To piggyback on what Chris said,
we would agree with that wholeheartedly, but it is a challenge to actually make something like that practical.
Well, guys, let's face it. As Americans, we don't like to share anything. I mean, really. This is a reality of our life right now.
Right.
So we also heard a question from somebody that has a muni electric and has successfully demoed a project involving it, fiber and the electric conduit. But we at the city cannot seem to break through our muni electric to expand past the demo project. It says electric management claims they need to focus on electric and water, even as telecom is also part of their official charter. How can the city council convince the muni utility to dedicate staff resources to continue into another expansion phase? Any takers on that one?
I can chime in kind of quickly at the beginning. I think we had, in order to solve that problem, I think we had to create a department, to be honest. I think they made an actual division. So basically Citylink is self-funded by the subscriber base, and it's not affiliated with the city in any way, shape, or form. The fact that, I mean, it is run by a muni, but they actually don't use any tax dollars, to fund it, because that would be illegal. It's a completely separate books and all that. And so I think they ended up having to, from the revenue generated, hire people to be dedicated for that, because that is tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in our circumstance, there was very much a thou shalt. It was the direction of our council that we were going to build past every address. And, you could get on board or not. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that vote to control the purse strings.
Yeah, I think I saw Will laughing a little bit. I mean, this is a real challenge. I've seen city councils with thou shalt still get defeated by staff that are determined in a utility to not get involved in this. And there's a danger in any in any monopoly utility of getting in a mindset of feeling like you have a kingdom and you're going to protect that kingdom. You don't want anything to change. And this is why I think one of the most overlooked parts of Chattanooga's success is the years they spent in the 90s and early 2000s, where they weren't really investing in fiber, but they were changing their culture, and they were getting ready to leave that monopoly mindset and get into one in which they conceived of themselves as being competitive and more responsive. And that's not to say every municipal utility has a problem of that monopoly mindset. Some do, and the cultural change can be the hardest part of a project.
Well, ultimately, municipal utilities have always felt strongly about economic development and economic development leading to load growth, and if you view this as one of the many spokes of the wheel of community and economic development, helping to make your community more desirable for investment, that's going to help with load growth. And for the most part, municipal utilities are dependent on growth in their service territory in order to have load growth and continue to expand what they're doing in their enterprise. So you've got to look at it through that community and economic development lens and understand the more you keep locally, the better it is for the entirety of the community.
Yeah. So here's one. I live in a rural area and want to be able to be of help to our city that's trying to improve services. What primer information can you recommend for someone to read to get up to speed on these issues?
So I'll go on that one. I mean, the broadband framework that I referenced, I'd say that's a starting point, and it's kind of an intimidating document. Even without the appendices, it's over 100 pages. But the good part about that, you don't have to read the whole thing. Look at the table of contents, figure out what's most relevant to you. And it has pointers to all these other national frameworks that it drew from. So I would recommend that as a starting point.
And Ben, where do you find that?
So that's at merit.edu/framework.
Okay.
Or Google Michigan Moonshot. I would just wholly second what Ben said. I think it does a great job of collecting good resources, pulling together. I would say dig into that. Look at something in there that captures your interest and you think would be relevant, and then dig into that angle rather than trying to get a sense of everything.
And then I know Chris's website has a lot of good resource information, as does the Fiber Broadband Association's website, and they actually have a fiber toolkit on their website, which can direct you then to other resources, such as NTIA has a whole Broadband USA subcategory that is also helpful. So if you're willing to dig around the internet a little bit, you can really find a lot of good tools. Anybody else want to add to that? So here's one. How are you reporting to Lifeline on prepaid services? That would be you, Will, right? You're doing prepaid? Okay.
Yeah, so it's in essence, the service has nothing to do with the payment mechanism. So the account inside of the billing system is just like it always is, the same. So the same reporting mechanisms on the accounting side goes back through with no change at all. The prepay is a completely separate system that just chunks out how they pay for it to us, right? So the monthly bill doesn't change. The only thing that changes, and none of that reporting changes. The only thing that changes is over on the accounting side, and it's all portal based for the customer. So exactly the same as every other service.
Okay. This will probably have to be our last question, but what are some of the strategies that you have used for data collection of your local areas to inform your build out and feasibility studies? And we all know the maps, the FCC maps are a mess. So Ben, Steve, Will, Chris, what do you recommend to overcome the deficiencies of those
My
maps?
phone blows up. Everybody here knows us. You don't have to worry about that. They come find you in a town like Wilson.
To answer it, it's a big question that I'll answer concisely. In Washtenaw County, we mailed a survey to everybody, 32,000 mailings, everybody in the rural areas. And we asked the people that had internet to go online and do an online survey, which included a speed test using the MLab speed test tool on the back end. The UCLA tool is also a good one to use on the back end. The mailing can be cost prohibitive for many. There's a lot you can do with text messaging and getting in touch with people that way. But yeah, I mean, it turns into a, if you're doing that data collection, it turns into a marketing exercise to get people to actually do the speed test.
Yeah, I would say, I would just build on that by saying that you want to deputize a group that's meeting regularly to be a small marketing committee that's doing this sort of a thing, reaching out to local civic groups, getting in the newsletter, deputizing people to really spread it through word of mouth, church groups, things like that.
Yeah, and a big part of our success was we had 15 townships participating, and so we were able to deputize the townships to spread the word within their own municipalities.
I know I've seen in Virginia where actually the counties have gone out and hired a consultant who goes pole by pole and looks at who has fiber there or who's got fiber in the rights of way in order to reconstruct a usable map. So I think some combination of all of these methods is what ultimately gets you into a working map.
Yeah.
And with that,
we do collect that data and have a map from it, but it's self-reported to us. Yeah.
It's a challenge. So hopefully we'll have a new map someday. But with that, let me thank you all very much. This was a great panel, and I'm hoping that we have lots of opportunities to follow up. But thank you, Craig.
Absolutely, and Heather, thank you for another phenomenal job as our moderator. Big thanks to our panelists, Chris, Steve, Ben, and Will, for your time and expertise. And a quick shout out to the ETI software marketing team, Pete Pizzatillo, Mary Beth Henderson, Cindy Stetson, for all the work behind the scenes to make this possible. On behalf of everyone here, I'm Craig Corbin. Thanks so much for letting us be a part of your day. We'll see you next time right here on the Broadband Bunch Zero Touch Learning Series. So long, everybody.
Thank you.